Mary, and it changed your life, didn't it?
Well, actually, the way I learned to taste whiskey changed my life.
Yeah, we learned how to taste whiskey better. That was a good one.
I learned about the squirrel.
No, we did learn about the squirrel. What squirrel?
Oh, exactly.
Oh, we're not muted.
Squirrel?
Squirrel.
Oh,
Okay.
very good.
Jack, do you want to say anything before I bring Pugliano up? You were standing over here.
Yeah, but then I realized I needed to get something before everybody tried to get it and said it's not there. So I went out to the garden and harvested some seed for you guys. I've got some African tree okra seed in a red cup sitting over there. I've got some of those good goots squashes, which are really a good gourd, that hang up in the trees back there. Um, the seed is for the gourd is kind of damp right now, so they're spread out on a paper plate, and it would be best if you gave them. Well, after this presentation, take some. There's also some seed from a massive, like 16-pound Trumbashino that I just pulled out too, that lasted almost 2 years in storage before it finally went soft. And that means those seeds have been in there nature intended for 2 years. There's not a ton of seed, but there's plenty for pretty much everybody to take like half a dozen. There's also a lot more of it that still needs to be pulled out, and I got tired of pulling it out. So if you don't get yours first and you want more, the fire table out there has the little short table with the chairs around it has, you can just pull it out for yourself. If you do that on the gourd, don't take any of the white seeds because they won't grow.
So you can pull out at the fire table. Okay, so this next cat is somebody I met here in 2017 when I decided to announce to a room full of 80 people I was not going to grow holler roast as anything but a side hustle. And then I realized I was lying to myself and a room full of people who I had just learned to like. So sorry about that lie, guys. Sometimes when we lie to ourselves, we lie to other people, right? But he came up to me afterwards and he was like, "We got to talk about your coffee." And he's been like, "Nicole, focus on the coffee. Why are you talking about that? Focus on the coffee." And he's right. In fact, John sees a lot of things. His company is Investable Wealth, and he is a money manager. And he also has a really cool podcast called the Wealth Studying Podcast. Everybody's heard of that, right? Have you listened to it? What I like about it is the episodes are not super long and dense, which means I can consume one at a time and learn things while doing other things. But I also like that he takes you know how we talked about you are the story you tell yourself yesterday, right? He takes that perspective of it's not is the economy good or bad? It's how can I make money off the current situation? So he's going to come up and talk to us about the post-election economy.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Great to be back. I look forward to this every year. It keeps getting better. To Nicole's comment about coffee, absolutely right. I've been staying on her about that for years. I don't drink coffee, right? And I only bring that up as a point as I always hear people say, well, I'm not going to invest in this stock or that because I don't like the CEO or I don't like the company. I don't use the product. I don't drink coffee. I have no idea if her coffee is as good as she says it is, although it smells like it is. But I know she was passionate about it, and I know other people like coffee. And so if you put those two together, whether I personally use coffee or not is irrelevant. I just thought that was great for her. And that's how you have to look at perspective of making money and changing your lifestyle. Just don't focus on what's, what your personal preference is, but what do other people do and enjoy, and how can you put that together? Hey, but I digress. Okay. In any case, listen, great to be here. I just have this little subtitle in here about my portfolio hasn't changed since the election. I've heard from a lot of people from the podcast asking me, what have you done since the election? And nothing's changed. Switch is not switching.
Right arrow.
Not
PC Invest in Apple.
See, don't be blaming me.
That's actually kind of weird.
Yeah, so the got it right. Okay.
Down and up.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So the aspect of my portfolio not changing isn't that I don't like the new administration that's come in, or that I like the old one, or this or that. It's just that when I invest, And when I look at life overall, I don't just look at a little short-term trend being something that's going to happen maybe over a year or two, or in the case of a president, even 4 years, but I'm looking at long-term trends. And that's really the essence of what I want to talk about today. More than anything, I'm going to focus on 4 or 5 big long-term trends. If you've heard me talk before, you've heard me talk about most of these before, if not all of them, because they are long-term trends, right? But let's, as I go through these, think about it. Think about how you're impacting this into your life, into your career, and hopefully into things you invest in. A couple disclaimers here. I'm going to say things that sound like I'm pro-Trump. I'm going to say some things that sound like I'm anti-Trump. I'm going to say some good and bad things about the Republicans, probably mostly bad things about the Democrats. But in any case, I dislike all politicians, right? I'm not taking sides. I don't care, right? I'm just an observer in the whole thing. And I heard Andy's talk yesterday, where there, that Andy. He said something like, and I'll try and quote him, he said, the CDC defines health as the absence of disease, okay? I define government as the absence of good, okay? So think about that. Okay, these are solely my opinions, right? Nothing else. I'm not offering investment advice today. As far as a book I wrote in 2016, again, I keep bringing this up. I don't even know if I make money on royalties from selling anymore, so it doesn't matter. I'm just telling you, a lot of the things I talked about back then in 2016, I'm going to be talking about again today, okay? They are long-term trends. So that's what we want to look for, like permaculture. We want to look at identifying patterns and working with nature, right? So you want to identify the economy and work with things. So here's a political question for you. You always see just before the election, people that wanted to vote for Trump or Harris, they were asking which political party is better for the stock market. And this was just a straight up Google search, and it's fun to do, you know, with all these AI things, do the same search in multiple types of Chat GPT or Gemini or different things, and you will get totally different answers. I asked the latest Chat GPT search version what wealth standing was, and it said great things about it. Talked about this movement and mentioned that it was all focused on Joel Salatin. So just no lie. That's what it told me. And I appreciate it. I'm going to start sending Joel, you know, checks, I guess. In any case, so this is I cut and pasted this out from one of the top responses I got when I asked this question about which political party is best for the stock market. And first off, I highlighted a couple of things. You're gonna see they're gonna say it's a pretty stark difference between Republicans and Democrats. No matter whatever side's putting that out is always going to say their side's better. And it's because how do you calculate it? How do you start it, right? Do you start it when the president gets elected? We know in their inaugural term, we've already saw the market bounce up quite a bit right after Trump got elected. So does that count for Biden? Because Biden's still president. Whenever anybody from Wall Street tries to talk to you about their performance, look at the dates, especially the start date. That's always a critical one. I highlighted this, and I don't know if this was a typo or if it's a hallucination from AI, but it's 1926. The election year started that trend, that era in 1924. So this is 2 years into Coolidge's presidency, right? So why would they start it 2 years into his presidency? I don't know. They picked that date for a reason. And whenever you better credit or something, yeah, it actually would have been better though if they'd waited another 2 years. That's why I was curious why they picked that date. So anyway, when you hear people in the financial liar industry telling you something, look at the dates and try and understand why. They will almost always pick the lowest point in the market if they want to show that their performance is better, right? So everybody's like, oh, yeah, since February of 2008, here's my performance. Well, how was it over the last 6 months? Any case, so this is the answer you'll get. Be skeptical of that, and you can be skeptical of this too, because I also obviously got this from the internet. I did pull this from multiple sources. This particular one came from the Motley Fool because it was the least work I had to do to cut and paste it, but it pretty much jived with other places of data, especially Forbes, where they were different but similar, right? The key point I want to bring out here is if you go down, there's averages, there's means, there's modes, if you remember all that stuff from statistics. The median price going back pretty much post-World War II, this takes us back to Eisenhower, it's pretty much a match. 10 to 9% performance. This is per year. This is not over their 4-8 year, but if you average it over their entire presidency, that would be the yearly average, about 10-9%. You know what the return of the stock market is over that time? Right, somewhere around 8 to 12%, right? So has no bearing on who's president for the most part. That's my message. I do want to point out, though, you see 4 of these things are highlighted. Over the last 75 years or so, there's been 4 recessions that have occurred during the presidential election year. Okay, 4 of them. There have been 4 recessions that happened during that time. You see, these are the four guys that it happened during their presidency. They all lost. It doesn't look like Eisenhower lost because it happened at the end of his second term. So Nixon lost when he ran against Kennedy the first time. But so every one of those highlighted presidents had a recession during their election year. It killed their presidency. They lost. And you'll notice that only one was a Democrat. I don't, maybe that's a coincidence. I'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at Trump and you look at Bill Clinton, 15, 14% per year performance. We're going to remember that number. Okay. I think we should have had a recession in 2023. If you followed me, I stayed in cash for pretty much that entire year, version of cash that entire year. And the reason I did that, I think I even have a pointer. The reason I did that is because not that I hated Biden. I didn't care who was president. I just looked at the data. And when I looked at things on as far as leading economic indicators, the Biden, almost throughout the Biden presidency, and I can't get this to work. You see that? Ooh, okay. Throughout the Biden presidency, this was the election where Biden won just before the election. You notice we had already peaked. These are leading economic indicators put out by the Conference Board, and they are, Conference Board is somewhat left of center, right? So this isn't some like right-wing propaganda. This blue trend is the 6-month trend of the change in leading economic indicators. It's historically has been really good at predicting recessions. Every time it dropped below that level, they have it highlighted in red. That's not my indications. That's theirs. Those red lines have always or almost always predicted a recession. We went up from the pandemic. Biden gets elected. This is his first year from once he was inaugurated. He pretty much peaked in the summer of his first year, and it went down ever since. Leading economic indicators predicting the economy for the next 6 months went down for the entire, basically 2022. And then when we got into the end of 22, all the way into where we are now, we have consistently been at the recession level. Recession was never, ever called during that time, right? It was called, and what was 2024? It was an election year. If they had a recession, Biden wouldn't have won. Didn't win anyways, so I guess that didn't matter. But I think I was not afraid to invest at all in 2024 because I thought that the likelihood of recession was not going to happen, not because the data was bad, but just that they were going to spin it that it was good. But I was very surprised that we didn't have one in 2023. Okay, as far as my first trends, big government cronyism. And you know what an ism is, like communism, socialism, feminism, whatever. All these isms, capitalism. My theory is the governments don't care about isms. Right? They use whatever they think other people care about so that they can maintain power, gain and maintain power. And so over the last, I don't know, at least 80 years, the trend of big government has been growing along with manipulating whatever system that they're in, right? If it's communism, it's the Chinese Communist Party has grown and taken over the country of China. In the United States, it's been, quote, capitalism. It's grown and taken over our country. Scandinavian countries, it's socialism. It doesn't matter. It's all big government. They're going to use whatever dichotomy they want to convince people to vote for them so they can keep power. We know in our economy that it's that collusion thing. Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. Well, it's on steroids now, right? It's the everything complex. And we know how one dirty hand washes the other. The media, the education system puts out dietary standards. Farmers, those dietary standards complement the monocrops that the farmers grow that are killing everybody. It makes people sick. They go to health care. The doctors don't make people healthy. They just prescribe them more drugs for big pharma. And it's just one big hand washing the other so that they can gain more power and authority. It really all starts and ends with the media. I have media at the top, but think of our big tech companies. They are either directly just media companies anyways, or they're tech people that got rich enough that they bought media companies. So, Elon Musk owns X. The guy from Amazon owns Washington Post. Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post. Meta is just it's not even a technology company. It's just a media company. It's all about the propaganda and getting people to buy into this collusion. I will say, though, somewhat breaking that trend, and I don't think I've ever seen this in my life, and I know you guys probably think I'm 35, but I'm a little older than that. Washington Post and LA Times did not endorse Harris. I didn't statistically go back and look that up and see how many times they don't endorse a Democrat, but I thought that could be a major shift we're seeing. Bottom line, though, is that the elites, the establishment, the power, whoever they are, they hide behind the ism to gain and manipulate things. And just think about the port strike that we had. Remember, no one remembers now because it's gone. It's in amnesia. We had a East Coast shoremen's port workers strike. Got resolved in a few days, right? That literally could have crippled the economy because it was everything from pretty much, the Canadian border all the way down through Texas. Is the longshoremen are part of that. What happened? Anybody know what happened in that strike? Yeah, it wasn't resolved. A lot of people said it was resolved. No, it wasn't resolved. It was delayed till January. Would that have happened if Trump was president? I don't think so. If he was president or running for re-election, I doubt it. So the elites, they're going to manipulate things. That sort of gets back to that chart I showed you earlier about Biden. We didn't have a recession in 2023. Not that they shouldn't have been called. They just distort and manipulate the data. So that's a trend. And you'll see how all these trends are blending together. Another long-term trend is the rising opposition to big government. And this has not been going on for 80 years, or we wouldn't have the big government we do. But I would say definitely in the last 10 years, there's been more and more concern and pushback on big government. And it goes all the way back. I mean, I can remember even way before the pandemic. Remember when they had one of the government shutdowns, and they just had a bunch of veterans, old veteran guys were pissed off that the Vietnam Memorial was shut down or something. And people were just saying, I'm fed up with this crap. I'm not putting up with it anymore. We obviously saw that get much more robust during COVID, and I don't think it stopped. And it's not just an American thing. If you listen to the media, it's like, oh, Americans are crazy. I'm leaving the United States and going to France. You don't think things are just as bad in France? Probably worse. Look at Europe. 2016, which was when Trump got elected the first time, that was Brexit. Brexit happened before Trump. These trends were in place. When the United Kingdom wanted to leave the EU, they were fed up with the EU's overregulation. They were fed up with excessive immigration, stagnating economy. All these things is what drove them on. It wasn't that they were far right or racist or anything. They were just fed up of having a stagnant economy for the last 30 years. Well, let's fast forward. The United Kingdom, again, it's big government. Their politicians have totally screwed everything up. They've gotten their government's been thrown out multiple times. They can't really hold a prime minister there. So things haven't improved since Brexit for England, but they at least were resolved about these issues that once they put their politicians in, they didn't do anything about them. That carried over to England, or carried over to the rest of Europe. If you looked at the European elections over the last 4 years, in almost every case when the media describes it as like far-right movements, it's just all about the same Brexits. It's just that France is mad at the EU now. Germany's mad at the EU. Everyone's mad at the big government controls. And it's the same issues, plus it's been magnified since Ukraine was invaded because their energy costs have gone up substantially. And particularly in Germany. Germany was the most reliant on Russian gas, but in the EU in general, their electricity costs 2 to 3 times what it does in the US. Their natural gas is 4 to 5 times. Okay, if you're in a heavy industrial German business or career, you're not doing very well right now because you can't compete on the global market because your energy costs are just way too high. They can't make, their chemical industry, their auto industry. They just can't support those anymore because their energy costs are through the roof. That was ultimately because of bad government decisions, and the people were pushing back against that. One other thing on stagnation. I'm talking too long here. I got to move on. John, don't digress. This is important. Microsoft, Apple, either right at or about 50 years ago where those companies were established. Okay. Meta, Google, probably about 20, 25 years ago, they were established. Even NVIDIA, I think, was established about 40 years ago. So these companies have been around, some of them more than others, but over the last 20 to 50 years, we've seen a major increase in the U.S. economy because of technology and because of the growth that we've had. We haven't had the stagnation that Europe has. There has been no, I repeat, no European Union startup in the last 50 years that exceeds about 100 billion in market capitalization. Not one. Okay. Nvidia's what, over 3 trillion now? I think Meta's a trillion or so. Microsoft, Apple are all a couple trillion. It's unbelievable. Their stagnation is historic. Getting back to this chart again. You know, they tried to convince everybody that there wasn't a recession, right? And again, people were opposing the big government propaganda. They tried to tell everybody there wasn't a recession. 90% of Harris voters rated the economy as excellent or good. So it's working, right? The problem was, though, Jack, the good news is, the problem is 70% of the people didn't believe that, right? So that's the pushback. And that, again, this is a trend that I'm happy I'm seeing.
That's why the Washington Post didn't endorse Harris.
Right.
They knew that.
Another long-term trend is demographics. And again, I've been talking about this one forever. It's in my book. It's almost something I talk about all the time. Demographics is specifically population decline is what we're worried about. All those isms I talked about, the governments, again, they use communism, they use socialism, whatever trend they thought the people cared about is what they talk about. But the bottom line, all that growth was pretty much coming just from population growth. I showed this chart a year or so ago. This is US GDP over the last, 60 years or so. It's all based, GDP almost perfectly follows population growth. All the global growth that we had, it's because we've exploded in population. World War II, we had about 2 billion people in the world. Today, we have over 8 billion, but it's tapering out. It's flattening out. A lot of that instability and the stagnation is not only because of bad government policies, but it's because they took credit for things they had nothing to do with to begin with. So we're seeing that collapse. Obviously, urbanization has slowed down the growth. Most countries, and I remember when I started showing these things, I didn't even bother to look at the fertility rates on women every year. I've been putting that up in years past. They're all so low now, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's virtually no country. There might be 1 or 2 developed countries that are above the level of replenishment, but other. There are countries that are, but I'm talking developed countries that can feed themselves are not above the rate of sustainability. And I think even the U.S. this year we're below like 1.8, 2.1 is what you need to stabilize. Italy, South Korea, places like that. 1.4. It's a collapse. Okay, major issue. That's something we'll talk about later because that's another big problem. But here's some kind of good news and bad news about this. The baby boomers, we see this in our economy, and we had the biggest baby boom here in the U.S. We also had the biggest echo baby boom, the millennials coming out of that, which is what's helping our economy. But those baby boomers, they're all going to be retired in the next 5 years. Most of them already are, and in the next 5 years, they're going to be massively retired. That is going to put a major, that's why we've seen the wage inflation that we've seen. That's one of the reasons. That's not going to go away. Trump's going to have the same problem. I know he talks a lot about curbing immigration. I think mostly what he's talking about, though, is curbing illegal immigration. We need immigrants. We do not have enough people in this country to grow the economy that we want. I was talking to David the other night. He confirmed that. And just what he sees, I was worried about, maybe we just couldn't even train these people. But Dave is really confident that we can get these. If we have the workforce, we can do it. And so that's good news. I think we are going to see a bigger brain drain than we've seen in the past because people are going to start leaving even the developed nations as we allow more of them into our country. And that's going to be good for the U.S. And I know a lot of you are saying, but they're screwing up the U.S. culture. 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Okay, that's NBC. I got that from NBC. 55% of Latino men. Think about that. I think that's a good thing. The other bottom line, again, my book, The Robots Are Coming, it is only going to increase robotics and automation and the infrastructure needed to support that. That was the whole concept of that book. So these trends all evolve in themselves. Another bit of thing that I look at good news on this is that those baby boomers, right, they're all retiring. They've got $78 trillion in assets. 78 trillion. Think about how big the debt is, how big the economy is. Well, we've got more assets just held by the baby boomers than either of those categories. So that's US. That's US only. That's US only. 78 trillion. Okay. Think about this. Over the next, 15, 20 years, all that money by those baby boomers is either going to be spent on healthcare or discretionary spending, right? They want to go on vacation, things like that, or they need healthcare. Or the ultimate scenario is they're going to go on to their reward and their kids and grandkids are going to inherit $78 trillion. Okay. Think of that in terms of the economy and where you want to be investing and where you want to be positioning. People inherit money spent. Jack said, Jack knows what I said during COVID. I said, if I die, my kids are going to be sad. They're going to cry. They're going to miss dad. Then they're going to spend all my money. Next trend, U.S. industrialization. We've been deindustrializing my whole lifetime, right? I joined the Marine Corps at 17, not because I was a patriot, not because I was a Rambo. It was in between wars, so I didn't join to go save our nation. I joined because I needed a job. Right? I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, the mills, the coal mines, everything was shutting down. I didn't have any skills. I needed to leave Pittsburgh and go get a job. And it was because of deindustrialization. At that time, all of our stuff had gone to China, had gone to Japan. It had later gone to Korea and Taiwan. Of course, since the 90s, it's all gone to China. So that globalization had been a trend. But what I think we're starting to see is a new trend of industrialization, reindustrialization in the U.S. And again, that was a trend in the book that I wrote, The Robots Are Coming. It wasn't all about the robots are going to take all of our jobs. It was about how automation is going to help us be more creative and be more productive. And it was actually going to be good for the economy long term. The thing to remember about industrialization, after World War II, and this is why I have the national security up here, we think about the economy and trade and our careers and things like that as to how they help us, how the economy is going to help us grow and how we can spend things. The government, I think, thinks about the economy in terms of national security, right? Whether it's the deep state or whoever, the ultimate government planners, they're looking at national security. And post World War II, we were, China's the factory of the world today. Well, we were the factory of the world back in the 1940s. We were not only the factory of the world, we were also the finance system of the world. We were the military power. We were everything. We basically had, I think, 90% of all the known gold reserves in 1945 were in the U.S. that we either owned directly or we had taken to pay back debts from the Europeans. So we were the country. We had an unstoppable economy at that point. Our national defense planners used our economy to further what they considered peace or national security. So we went back and we rebuilt Japan. We rebuilt Germany. We gave them unbelievable access to our economies so their economies could build up, right? So we sacrificed our economics so that we didn't have to fight a war. That was the basic concept. And that wasn't a bad concept. But like all things, and like what we say, government is what? The absence of good. It led to problems. And what it has eventually done, and I've seen it over my career, again, from 17 years old until I left the corporate world in the 2000s. Over that time period, I saw American industry gutted. Because when I got out of the military, I started working in industrial sales and marketing, and I traveled out throughout the Midwest. And over a 10-year period, I saw literally, I'd say 80 or 90% of those small little factories that were in every little town in the Midwest, they all went overseas. It was a long-term trend, but it just got even more magnified once China started to grow, and especially once they got into the World Trade Organization. It's gotten to the point now where it's the lack of our manufacturing base is now a national security issue. So again, I am feeling much better about this new trend that the deep state is now worried about. Not that they care about our jobs and our careers and our economy, but they care about national security. And so they're looking at increasing our manufacturing base to stabilize our national security and our government. And I think that's a good thing. And again, we have seen these things happen. It's been a long learning curve. I don't know why they waited so long, but things like the war on terrorism, we thought Saudi Arabia was our friend because we bought all this oil from them. We know what Saudi Arabia was complicit in the terror attacks. The Great Recession showed us that all the financial dealings didn't matter because all the assets were overpriced and we weren't manufacturing anything here. Production is a source of wealth. You hear me talk about that as the third wealth building principle. You can't have production without producing something, right? It can't just all be finance, just can't all be paper assets. We learned that during the Great Recession. I think we've been trying to slowly build out of that because the government's not going to step back and say, hey, we made this big bubble and it's all going to collapse. They're going to slowly, gradually do things to correct that. And I think they have been correcting it. I think when Trump got into office his first time, this was again evident, not only his election, but the fact that the government was even working with him, even though they complained about him. He changed the national security policy. And I don't think Trump just did that on his own, right? I think he had people behind the scenes making that happen. That shift of where we used to have strategic trade officially when Trump got elected in 2016, that went to strategic competition. They changed the phrase. We were no longer strategically trading to help our allies. We now focused on trade so that it strategically helps the United States. And Biden, before this election, you've heard these things. Oh, Trump's going to do tariffs. Trump's going to raise all these costs. Biden never got rid of any of the tariffs Trump put in. Biden put on more tariffs. Biden doubled down and put on more industrial policy. He did the CHIPS Act. He did the Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation. It was all about subsidizing American businesses. These were all in an effort for national security to build up our industrial base. So that stuff was going to happen whether Harris got elected or not. We're moving that direction. I think Trump is going to move it in a better direction, but it was happening anyways because we have to have it. And another trend, and Don, if David's in the room, he'll verify this. Since the pandemic, although the housing market, different things have been a little sketchy, industrial construction spending in the U.S. is going up 200% annualized. It's a 200% annualized increase compared to where it was pre-pandemic. So if you had the trend weight on here pre-pandemic, it's consistently been up here post-pandemic. It's unbelievable. That's why you still can't get industrial things built out. Bottom line though, trade, we used to think trade produced peace. If you trade with your neighbor, they won't go to war with you. It just makes your enemy stronger, right? We found that out with China. And speaking of China, I'm not saying that globalization is dead. A lot of people run around saying that too. Oh, globalization is over. No, it's just that I think globalization has peaked. We still will have other allies. We still have to trade with other nations because we can't do everything ourselves. We need that friendship. So globalization isn't dead. It's just peaked. It's just peaked. One of the reasons it's peaked, in addition to national security, and it's all those isms I talked about. They promote communism, socialism, capitalism, but they're really just the government's just making itself stronger. The Chinese hasn't helped its economy, even though they've become the factory of the world. I think they have something like 37 or 38% of all global manufacturing now. This is the Chinese stock market since 2005. They peaked in 2008. They've never recovered. This is priced in dollars, so it'd look different if you looked in yuan. But in U.S. dollars terms, keeping it equal, they are no better than they were in about 2007. They're not growing their economy, right? They're actually destroying wealth because they're stealing businesses and economies from other nations. It's making the Communist Party stronger, but it's not making the country stronger. Energy transformation. This has been a big long-term trend, and I'm not talking about what you hear in the media about, oh, we're all going to electric vehicles and things like that. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm not saying I'm opposed to that, but it's not that kind of renewable energy transition that I'm talking about. Renewables are great. I've been working on a video forever I haven't edited where I was recently out in Utah in a little town that no one's ever heard of. And they've got some major, they're sitting right on a like a little geyser, kind of like you'd see in Yellowstone. And the power they're trying to generate from that is just amazing. So, I mean, there are a lot of great things that have happened. I'm not opposed to solar or wind or any of that, but it hasn't been realistic in what's really going on with the energy transition. The real transition is that the United States has become dominant in producing petrochemicals, producing oil, producing natural gas. We are the Saudi Arabia natural gas of the world. We have the lowest production costs in natural gas. Again, I talked about this in my book all the way back in 2016. That's a major reason then in that book, I just, because I didn't know that we're going to have COVID. I didn't know people were going to worry about, supply chain issues and stuff that happen after COVID. But in the book, I make the point that energy is becoming so cheap in the US that when you couple that with the advances in automation, cheap labor from overseas won't matter anymore. You want to make things in the US. And that's why we've seen this big growth in the United States and in our manufacturing. And these low natural gas costs in particular are now being amplified by the fact that we have tariffs, we have the sanctions, we have all these other aspects that the government's imposing for national security reasons. That's only making our reliance on fossil fuels even stronger. So when you hear about an energy transition, the real energy transition is to natural gas. When I hear a lot about emerging markets too, my portfolio right now, I still have about 25% in cash, and of the 75% or so of stocks that I own, there's almost nothing outside the United States, or there's a few. There's some Europeans, a couple Canadian things, but almost all, and even the things that I own that are in other countries is emphasized on their sales here in the US. So when people ask me about emerging markets, it's the United States. United States manufacturing is the emerging market I want to be invested in. Again, over the years, I've shown this chart. I keep updating it. This is US oil production. This is going back to 1920, okay? So I joined the Marines like right in there, right? Because we had peaked oil, we had come down. We were in a major recession because of, if you remember all the Arab oil embargo we had in the 1970s. Our cost of oil drastically went up because our production started going down. So we had all through the growth, the major growth that we saw post-World War II came as we increased our oil capacity. Then things started to fall apart. We peaked in the 70s. We tried to recover. This is the Reagan era. We tried to recover things, but then they fell apart and totally went into decline until around 2011, 2012. A lot of that had to do with the cheap money that was now available. We could go after the fracking and the horizontal drilling. It also had to do with technology. We had been fracking since 1946 or 47, but it took big data, big computers, satellite imaging, horizontal drilling of the robotics, all that it took to actually get that oil. But once we figured it out, boom, we are on top of the world right now. We are not only, I said we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, we are still, even just in terms of oil, we are the largest producer in the world. When people talk about the petrodollar, petrodollar, I won't get into all the things of why I think it's irrelevant, but think of this. When you're worried about the petrodollar and you're worried about, okay, so China's going to start buying oil directly from Saudi Arabia. They're not going to use the US dollar anymore. Okay, think about what that amount may be, however many billion or trillions of dollars it is. It pales in comparison to all the oil that the US isn't buying from anybody else anymore, right? Because we're producing and selling it to other people now. So that wipes out any petrodollar concern. I can explain that to you offline. It's maybe hard to visualize here. Bottom line, though, is the reason this is my favorite chart is because technology improves the human condition, right? I'm optimistic because I think that just like oil, all my life, I heard that we had peak oil. We were running out of oil. We weren't going to have any natural resources. Well, technology changed all that. The resources were here. We just figured out how to use them. I think that technology is going to do the same thing with healthcare, with education, right? Our education system's broken. We can improve that with artificial intelligence, with remote learning, with all the things that we have in place now. We just got to get the government out of the way. So I remain optimistic. That's why this has been my favorite chart. Let me show you my new favorite chart. This goes along with the energy transition. I've never bought into the whole EV thing that they're going to be, the old thing of they replace the horses in 10 years. The Tony Sebo thing. Yeah. And again, it's not that I'm driving a hybrid right now, right? Okay, it's a rental, but I'm driving a hybrid. My concern with things like EVs is just the hype that they've been produced with. It isn't that they're not viable someday, but the reason I never believed that they were going to suddenly switch over is because we never had a projection of energy increase, right? We kept saying, even in forward estimates, that, oh, energy is not going to grow more than 1% a year. It hasn't grown that much since the 70s. We've been stagnating ever since our industry was leaving America. We didn't need more energy sources. Well, now, especially with artificial intelligence, all this is changing. And this is they're saying a 3% growth rate, basically tripling what they used to think we're going to grow at. Some people don't think this is even high enough. And so I'm very optimistic at this point, because I knew that electric vehicles could never take off because we never had enough regular energy to meet the demand for EVs, right? We didn't have enough coal plants or natural gas plants in place to produce all that energy. We certainly weren't going to do it with the renewables. But now the emphasis is on nuclear energy. Everybody's pretty much convinced that if we're going to be tripling or quadrupling our energy needs, we have to go to nuclear energy. It's the only way. Okay, so again, that makes me, it's just like that chart. All my life, they've been saying no, 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 no to nuclear energy, just like they said we were running out of oil. Well, now I think that's shifting. So I'm extremely optimistic on nuclear energy. But again, I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I'm not saying go out and buy nuclear energy stocks for, all this new technology. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Again, the good news is we have, decades and decades of natural gas that we can use as energy till we get there. But I think this is going to be that technology that takes us to the next step and helps us improve all these problems. Let me reemphasize. Am I excited about nuclear energy? Yeah, this is as excited as I get. You understand? I think this is a big thing. One last trend I haven't talked about. And this kind of gets back to how I haven't changed my portfolio. I didn't change this trend. I wrote this before the election. I didn't change this trend, okay? Here's the trend. Trump. Trump is the trend. Now, that didn't mean that I thought Trump was going to win. I actually thought Trump was going to lose because the Democrats are even more incompetent than I thought they were, right? I thought they could cheat their way out of this. So I wasn't optimistic that he was going to win, but he did. But even if he had lost, he is still the trend, okay? And it's not Trump the man. It's that Trump has captured all these things that we talk about. He's talked about immigration. He's talked about the stagnant economy. He's talked about government overreach. All the things that are attracting people to him, whether he's going to solve them or not. He's done that because he's become part of the trend, and he's done that to the extent that he is now the trend. And this gets back to the Democrat thing where I say, I don't love or hate Democrats. I don't love or hate Republicans. I'm going to draw a parallel between Trump and Bill Clinton. If you remember that first charts I showed you where it was 14% annual growth for Trump, like 15% annual growth for Clinton. Clinton had the best economy, I think, of any president ever. Okay. Why is that? Do I love Bill Clinton? No. But I do like him more than Hillary. Let's look at Trump and Clinton. There's some interesting parallels. And again, going back to long-term trends, I did a video in the second year of that screenshot before was from the video I did the second year into Trump's first term. And I made some of these comparisons. I'm going to show you some more of that as we go. So this isn't a new thing, but it's really been reinforced since Trump got reelected. And this helped my presentation better because if Harris won, I'd had to kind of skew this. Since Trump won, it made it nicer. The reason, again, Clinton had a superior economy for 8 years, not because Bill Clinton was the best thing in the world. It's because he had trends going for him. He was the beneficiary, even though he complained about him. He loved the Reagan tax cuts. He loved the Reagan deregulation, right? All that, Reagan put that stuff in effect in the 80s. By the time Clinton got elected, it was there, right? All that, lags and delays, it kicked in. It grew his economy. That was a major factor. Trump is benefiting from his own tax cuts that have now been in place for 8 years, right? So he has those working for him. He says he's going to do more. I think that would be great. Even if he doesn't, though, just the overturn of the Chevron doctrine by the Supreme Court, right? That is big. That is huge. Unbelievable. That Chevron doctrine, you know what was put into place? 1984. You know why? To curb Reagan. They didn't want Reagan's deregulation, so they put that in place so they could fight him. That is gone now, and I'm very optimistic. I think that this deregulation can really carry over. It could be big. So I'm excited about that. End of the Cold War. One of the huge reasons that Clinton had such a great economy is because the Soviet Union went away and half the world opened up for trade. That was a big win. Okay, open borders, and all that all that technology that the military used, we civilianized it over these last 35 years, right? So we didn't used to have an internet because it was based on military technology. We didn't used to have GPS that civilians could use because it was all military technology. Telecommunications, all the satellites, that was all military stuff that we could use at and beyond the Clinton economies that we benefit from today. While that was all beneficial, it's sort of the reverse of that now, right? We're in the beginning of a new Cold War. And actually, I've heard the term now, hot peace. I think hot peace is a better term than Cold War, because we really can't afford to fight the Chinese, just like we used to have nuclear mutually assured destruction with the Russians. We sort of have economic mutually assured destruction with the Chinese. But the point of this is that we're beginning this new Cold War. And while we had all this technology that was unleashed, we're still just benefiting that from today. But we're restricting trade now. We're not letting China get our highest technology. We're not letting them get our fastest and most advanced chips. Any advanced technology, we're trying to keep that in the US, and we're trying to get it built here. We're building all these chip factories here in the United States now. It's a big shift, and we haven't seen this in 40, 50 years. So this could really help propel the Trump economy. The internet, again, a point I made in my book, the internet really gave us the digitization. You're talking about digitization, right? It's moving from analog to digital. Digitization in the early phases made data free. Okay, when I was a kid, everything knowledge cost huge amounts of money when I was a kid, right? You just couldn't go out and look something up. You had to go to the library. You had to look at an encyclopedia. Everything was 6 years old, the data you were reading. Today, what data is free? We have no. That's why I say when people are worried about the zombie apocalypse and things, I'm saying, just the internet alone has made life so much better. Take advantage of it. Data has become free. And again, a point I made in that book was that at some point, as we digitize, as that increases with automation and robotics and now artificial intelligence, we'll get to the point where digitization will make labor free. Okay? Get your head wrapped around that. It doesn't mean everybody's going to lose their jobs. It just means that a lot of jobs that used to require labor won't require that anymore. And just like data is free, there's still the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they still charge for their material, right? So not all data is free, not all labor is going to be free, but we're at the point where we are starting to digitize data, especially with the large language models. Now I know they don't do the things we want them to do. They haven't repaired my car, changed my oil yet, but right, they will. For if you're a graphic designer, it's replaced your labor, right? So that we're starting to see that is going to really help, I think, the Trump economy. The last main point, as I talked about, globalization isn't dead, but it has peaked. Clinton, more than anybody, benefited from globalization. He worked to get China into the World Trade Organization. It didn't happen until after he left office, but they had China from really the late 80s and all through the 90s was really dominant in increasing their manufacturing base. And so that was a huge thing that really drove the Clinton economy. Again, inverse of that, the America First policy, especially the fact that we have the energy and we have the automation, I think it's really going to drive the U.S. economy. May not going to be so good for the rest of the world, but I think it's going to be just fantastic for the U.S. Going back to that video I made, it's out on YouTube. This is a chart I show in there. This is the first 2 years of Trump's presidency compared to Bill Clinton. Clinton's in red, Trump's in black. Eerily similar, right? And that's on a proportional basis, though. I didn't mess with the axes. I made them to be proportional. Let's zoom out. This is Clinton over 8 years. He didn't quite make it 4 times. He didn't grow the S&P 4 times, but pretty darn close, something like 3.8. So it was a huge, huge increase. So when I talk about him having the best economy of any president, it's verifiable. It's not because he was a Democrat. It's just because of all those trends. So this is Trump. First 2 years. We had COVID, which screwed everything up, and then we had Biden, which messed everything up. And I don't have a comparative chart to show the difference, but the bottom line is, I guess 6 years ago, I was saying that if Trump could get reelected, we could see the S&P 500 hit 9,000. People thought I was nuts, right? 9,000. I don't know what it was back then. It was a lot lower. Today, we're at 6,000, and that was with Biden in. So we really aren't far off of where I thought we could have been. And if Trump would have been in that whole time, I think we would have hit 9,000. But I think the good news now is we're back to potentially being on that trend where we can see that major growth. And so I think 9,000 is not going to be a problem. I think we're going to see the S&P 500 grow. But yeah, this was from another video I did the first time Trump was in office. So I thought it was likely he would be a target. In any case, as much as I think this new economy can work, there's some big problems. If you remember the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, pretty much, I don't remember it either. I'm not that old. But those are the tariffs that in a lot of economists think that's what helped usher in or make the depression worse in the 1930s. So we do have to watch that. And again, the media is going to look for every way they can trip Trump up, right? So they're going to start talking about, oh no, it's going to cause a global recession. It could, right? It may not, but it could. We want to watch that. The trade sanctions that we have with China and the things we put on Russia, well, we put trade sanctions on Japan. We wouldn't let them buy oil, and that's pretty much what provoked the Pearl Harbor attacks. So, could we be headed to another worse war? Maybe. And again, there's going to be interests that want to make that happen to make Trump look bad. Talked about the elites, right? They control and dominate things. They are going to sabotage Trump every chance they get. If you look at, I didn't have time to put this chart in. If you look at the M2 money supply, as much as they talk about the economy slowing down, they're cutting back on things, M2 money supply has exploded. Okay, it had gone up post-pandemic. It started to come down. It's gone back up again. That was there to juice the economy up to get Biden reelected and then Harris. Well, the Fed cut rates 50 basis points right before the election, right? I don't think we needed that. Bitcoin was at or near an all-time record high. The S&P 500 was at or near a record high. All assets were, very much at record highs, and yet the Fed still wanted to cut rates. I think that was more about helping the election than it was anything with economics. But magically, right now that Trump's in office or getting ready to take office, the Fed's backing off. Long-term interest rates are back up. If you've seen mortgage rates lately, they're all above 7%. They kept projecting all these rate cuts we're going to get from the Fed next year. Watch to see if they get tapered off. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they do. During Trump's first term, well, even before his first term, from when he got elected in November of 2016, from that point until his first 25 months in office, Fed raised interest rates 8 times. 8 times. There was one interest rate increase under Obama, and it was the year before Trump got elected. So all Obama's term, he had one increase in December of 2015. The Fed's going to raise rates on Trump, I'm pretty sure. The other thing, who's excited? Jack sent me something with Elon and Doge. Yeah, it was before there was a Doge thing, but yeah, before officially Doge, but it wasn't Viveki. It was the one you sent me. Didn't it have it had Elon and no. Who's our favorite politician? Ron Paul. Wasn't Ron Paul on that one? Yeah, it was Ron Paul. And Ron Paul in the Department of Government Efficiency. And I think I am optimistic. Well, I don't want to be optimistic because I don't want to be disappointed. I'm hopeful that we can get some government efficiencies. I'd just be happy if they don't make anything worse. But the bottom line on that, you saw that first chart I had. I don't know if I mentioned it, where I listed all those government, the government and then the media and healthcare, all big government cronyism. That accounts for government spending accounts for 50% of GDP. If you add up federal, local, state, all that stuff, it's 50% of GDP. So if Trump really does cut back $2 or more trillion from the government, that is going to hurt the economy, right? And that's good. Right? If you're an alcoholic, right, you're going to go through some withdrawal symptoms to get out of that addiction. I'm okay with that. So I'm saying it may not all be rosy with the economy. If even if we get some of the things we want, it could hurt the economy. That's a short-term hit. I'd be willing to lose some money on that deal so that things can get better in the future. So I remain, as always, skeptically and cynically optimistic. I don't know. Do we have time for questions?
You have at least time for one question. Chad was up first. You're second. If we get time for two.
John, I love your content. I'd
Thank
pay
you.
for a paywall subscription like Roaring Kitty if you could just do it. Or have you considered doing something like that?
No, I'm never going to do that.
How about a subscription?
No.
Come on.
No.
All right.
It's yeah. I'd have to make more content. No, I do. Jack tells me all the time, make more content. It's consistency. It's all that, and that's true. And I don't. Sometimes Jack thinks I don't listen to him when he tells me stuff. It's just that I evaluate it and I make other choices. It's not. I'm not ignoring him. I'm not ignoring him. Bitcoin. Jack has been right on these things. I don't make more content because I'm not a content producer, right? It's a labor of love. I love making my podcast. The people that listen tolerate my absence at times, and they're very gracious, and I love the listeners. And that gets back to, you don't do everything for money, right? And I don't ever want to monetize any of that stuff.
John, 20 years ago, about 20 years ago,
When I die, my kids will probably put out AI generated subscriptions of me to make money, right?
I think it was about 20 years ago, the college students and young adults in Greece were rioting in the streets because the World Bank forced economic sanctions. They had to cut spending. They cut subsidies for college students. They cut a lot of government jobs. We're $36 trillion in debt. If we go down the same road, we'll have the same anarchy on the streets that we had in 2020, but for a different reason. How would you see us working our way out of that?
That's complicated. We'll talk about that offline. I think we're going to see you are magically going to start seeing more of the remember the Wall Street sit-ins or something. I forget what it was that we had. Occupy Wall Street. That stuff will all be coming back, I'm sure, and it'll be more focused on Trump and Elon, right? Those big crony capitalists. They'll ignore the regular villains, but I think we're in a different position, and the debt bothers me. It worries me, but I've heard the same arguments literally since 1968. I mean, I was a little kid in the VFW club listening to the old drunk coal miners complain about silver coming out of the coins and stuff, and we're going to go bankrupt, and Vietnam's going to spend all our money, and we are going to deflate ourselves out of that debt, is what I think. And when I was a kid, right, 1968, when there was people complaining, I literally couldn't even fathom someone living in a house that cost $100,000. I mean, I couldn't even get my head wrapped around that, right? What a house cost today, right? I'd like to move. I don't move because I don't see a house I like for under $2 million. And it isn't like I have great taste. It's just that everything has gone up so much in price. It's unbelievable. And so that it's all proportional, right? We have this crazy debt, but if we monetize the government, how much could we charge China for patrolling the oceans and letting their vessels go around, unobstructed throughout the world to get oil and iron ore and the things they need, right? What if we charge them for that? Just kind of think about those kind of things. What if the government was more efficient in their data use instead of coming after us to pay more taxes? What if they used that as an advertising thing that they sold off government assets? Run the government like a business.
What?
I mean, it could happen. I don't know, but either way they will inflate their way out of that.
Last question.
Hey, John. Thanks for the presentation. I always look forward to it every year. It's just worth the price of admission just to get your presentation there.
And for all you guys that are online, you should have been here, right?
Yeah.
You come to these events.
Now, and I agree with 100% about manufacturing. It's going to come back. It has to come back. And I'm sure you've heard that reportedly Trump's going to tax corporate at a max rate of 15 if they're produced here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, 60% on Chinese imports, the tariff. So that's all great for the long term, but it's going to
Take a hit.
Yeah.
As I said, that 50% of GDP is all that government spending, and absolutely could take a hit.
So how long do you think it'll be before we start to flip that?
I don't know. If you look at Trump's first term, market went up really good in 2017, and then kind of taper out a little bit in 2018 and started to take a dip in 19. And that was because his tariffs started to take effect. But just before the pandemic, it started to get back to those pre-tariff things on China back then. So it's always a one-time hit, right? How many people? I mean, ammunition. What do we pay now for a 22 round of ammunition? 21 cents. Remember when it was not that even, like, not when I was a kid, but not that long ago, it was under $5, right? So we got used to it, right? We're still going to go out and buy 22 ammo, even though it costs as much as 357 Magnum used to cost, right? We still buy it because we got used to it, and it'll be the same way. There could be a hit. In terms of the stock market, it's still great. Companies, being a business owner, right? You take your costs and things, and you're going to add your markup to it. So if you mark it up from here to here, and the prices go there, you're just going to mark it up more. I'm not worried. Getting back to the question about the debt too, the whole thing is, if you own appreciating assets, regardless of what happens to the dollar or the currency side of it, your assets still appreciate because they go. Doesn't matter if you're valuing them in yen, yuan, deflated US dollars, the asset holds its value. So it could take a hit short term, but again, if it made efficiencies, I'd be okay with that. Because long term, it's about long term, right? It's not about. I'm a 30-year overnight success. Literally, I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I didn't save my first million, didn't save my first million until I was 30 years later, right? 48, when I hit my big, it took a long time. But you know what? 2 million, a million. I remember a million. I don't remember hitting 2 million. I don't remember hitting 3 million. I remember hitting 4 million. I don't care. It was when I hit that million that mattered. So you become the 30-year overnight success, and then you forget about the other stuff.
Okay, I know that every time you speak, we have all these unasked questions. So where are you going to go hang out right now so that the rest of these people are going to go out to the fire pit?
I'll be right out front.
Okay.
I apologize for going over.
Oh, no, you're fine. It's just, I just wanted to make sure they knew where to go to keep asking questions, and the people who want to lurk and listen can lurk.
I'll be right out there. And as usual, I'll be awake till what, 8:30, 9 o'clock?
8:30, 9 o'clock, yeah. Now, John's great because he hangs out with us, and you can get one-on-one time with him easily. John, thank you so much.
Thank you.